and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. But Alex, would you mind kicking us off with a prayer just to start this session?
Sure, man.
Thanks.
All right, name of Father, Son, Holy Spirit. I'll just start with a minute or so of silence. Come, Holy Spirit. Come, Holy Spirit. Come, Holy Spirit. God, please be with us during this time. Help us, our conversation, our words, our discussion to be inspired with your love and your fire. We give thanks for all of the amazing work of all of the people on this call, and for your inspiration behind each of them. And we pray that we may do your will in all things and give glory to you in all things. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Thanks, Alex. So just a short introduction. So many of you know, Alex personally.
Do you make everybody else lead the prayer? Or
was that bad? I'm sorry. Well, you got the prayer app, man. You're the one who's
take charge there, man.
Well, I just figured you had the prayer app. I was going to give deference to
it's fair.
you.
It's a fair count. It's a fair count.
Yeah.
Everyone else do it.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the. Sorry, thought I was being differential. So in terms of introduction, so Alex, as you know, started Hallow. His background was he was at Notre Dame as an undergrad, and worked at McKinsey doing management consulting afterwards, and then went to business school at Stanford, and there started Hallow. Kind of came out of a personal need for authentic Catholic prayer, and meeting a need out there. So he's and it's grown and flourished, and has built a great team and company so far. So Alex, thank you for being with us. We'd love to turn it over to you for hearing some of your journey and especially with respect to Hallow, how you think about metrics and goal setting, and then other kind of advice you might have for entrepreneurs.
They keep trying to ask me something. Alex, can you flip these?
Dan, for some reason I can't mute you on it, but you might need to. Yeah.
There we
go. Yeah, man. Thanks for the intro. What do we have? 20 minutes or so, you said, and then.
Yeah, something like that.
All right, just cut me off if I start rambling. Probably won't take up all the time. And please interrupt me, anybody, if you have any questions. One, super humbled to be a part of this. I am very, and the Hallo journey is very, very early days. So it's not like we've figured anything out. So we're probably wrong on 90% of the stuff we say. So don't take any of it with gospel truth. Could all collapse in a year. So we'll see. But can share a little bit of our journey and how we thought about stuff. I mean, for those, I don't need to go. I'll spend probably most of the time. Oh, John, am I able to share my screen at all?
You should be able to. I can make the co-host if it's not working.
Yeah, that'd be great. But anyway, I'll have a couple. I can share a couple of our metric tracking tools or whatever at the end if anybody has questions on anything. But that Hallo Journey, real quick for the folks who aren't familiar, it's a prayer app. The 35-second version of the story is I was raised Catholic by my saint of a mother who dragged me to mass, and I fell away from my faith, would have called myself atheist agnostic, and high school and college, and then was really fascinated by this meditation thing, and sadly thought first of secular meditation, and so started using Headspace and Calm, and thought they were like really cool tools, really useful. But then every time I would like just sit down and shut up, my mind would be pulled towards something spiritual, which I thought was super strange. So started just asking a bunch of people, priests, brothers, sisters, is there any type of way that this whole meditation thing and this whole faith thing intersect? And everybody laughed at me and said, yeah, it's we've been doing it for 2,000 years. It's called prayer. You should probably have heard of it by now. And I was like, initially I was like, I've done the whole prayer thing. I know the Our Father, I know the Hail Mary, and I know like, hey, sorry for stuff, help me with stuff. Thanks for stuff. And a priest I was talking to was like, that's not, those are great prayers, really powerful. But how much of the time that you've tried praying do you spend listening? And, I was like, I don't even know what that means. And so he started teaching, and he mentioned a handful of things, and a bunch of other people mentioned a handful of things, and started trying all these and learning about all these really cool contemplative prayer techniques, Lectio Divina, Benedictine spirituality, Carmelite spirituality, and Ignatian spirituality, and Examen and Recollection, all this stuff that I had never really heard of before. And it completely changed my life. I sat down and tried a Lectio Divina session, broke down in tears, and it was just like this awesome combination of peace, like this deep sense of peace with, you'll have to forgive the train that comes by every once in a while, this deep sense of peace with this real, like, what are you supposed to do with your life type thing? Like, try to be a better person. So it was like this deep meat of meaning and purpose with peace. So anyway, the idea behind Hallow was like, hey, if Headspace and Calm can be successful doing this for secular meditation or Eastern meditation, why can't the same thing be done for Catholic contemplative prayer and meditation? And so that was about 2 years ago. I coded the first version of the app, which was absolutely terrible. It was just something that could play and pause an audio file. And then we brought on some people who told me that it was absolutely terrible and fixed it all. And then we launched like 1.5 years ago, and have been super blessed since, just trying to work on content and product and trying to figure out a way to grow. So that's like that's the Hallow story. I guess I'll talk for a bit about like the Northstar Metrics stuff, and how we thought about that, and then we can dive into wherever. I'll probably start a little bit with like why you guys obviously probably all know why it's important, but a little bit of how we were convinced it was important, a little bit of how we decided what metric we'd use, and then a bit on how that's helped shape us. So we'll hit on those few things. But the it's interesting. I was thinking about this leading up to this conversation. It's kind of like the way that I describe being an agnostic or atheist in that time in my life. It wasn't like this, I don't know, it was I'm not proud of a lot of things, but it's not like you consciously do a bunch of really bad stuff. It's just like when you don't explicitly put God first, other things go first. And it's, they just go there without you consciously choosing what goes first. And so it's either money or career or girls or status or whatever it was, sports, whatever. But like something will come first. And if you're not the one consciously choosing it, it's dicey. And I think the Northstar metric is kind of pretty similar. I mean, it's obviously not anywhere near as important as putting God first, but it is a similar philosophy, which is, there's so many different things that are important to building some type of organization, especially in a mobile app. Like the metrics in a mobile app it's like 80% a metrics game, just trying to optimize a bunch of different stuff and trying to get people to click this button versus that button or whatever. But it can get so confusing to be like, especially to decide whether something worked or didn't, or whether things are going well or not, because there's like 18 different things you can pick, and like entrepreneurs are inherently optimists. So you'll just look for, okay, open rates weren't great, or this usage wasn't great, but we got like 1,000 people to sign up for this thing or whatever it was. And having one thing consciously that you put first is super helpful from a decision-making criteria. Like, you still have to look at all the other metrics and manage everything according to those. But having one thing that's like, look, at the end of the day, this is the thing that's going to drive our decisions. This is the thing that we're going to measure ourselves against, is a super helpful, like, if you don't be explicit on what comes first, you know, revenue or profitability or subscribers or retention, or like things that don't really drive the core of the mission, will come first instead, which is, you know, and that can be whatever it is for you guys. But that was one of the big things. And it also helps you focus a lot. Like, I think one of the big problems in what, like, technology in the faith world, technology more broadly, but I think the secular world has started to figure it out over the last 10 years or so, but is like focus and simplicity. And there's so many awesome things that you can do with technology that trying to do like 100 of them. But if you try to do like 100 of them, it always ends up feeling cluttered or clunky and not a great user experience. And then it's like, what are you doing? You're just doing a bunch of things mediocrely well, not one thing really, really well. And so the kind of Northstar metric helps you to say, okay, we can add this feature, we can add this content or whatever, but is it driving this? And if not, then you have to get rid of it. And having that like mindset towards focus, I think, has been super helpful for us, at least. And then the last thing is, it's also kind of exciting. So it's like, people say, which I hate, I think are stupid, but like setting big, hairy, audacious goals, or BHAGs, or whatever the word is, which is a dumb business school word that I hate that it even came out of my mouth. But it is exciting to be like, you know, setting some signpost that gets people excited. And the fun part in the startup world is like, anything above 0 is exciting because you're so small. So it's a lot harder for like a big company to get excited about something. But for us, it's like, you know, saying, hey, we want 1 million people praying or whatever, is like crazy. Like, I couldn't possibly imagine us ever achieving that. But it's also cool. Like, you start really small and you start getting like, okay, like 100 to 1,000 to 2,000 to whatever. And you start like, well, maybe this is actually somewhat achievable. And it gets you kind of excited about like the long-term building of the organization. So that's kind of the why that we were convinced of. For us, the choosing was, or the selection of the metric was an interesting one. It was, there was a bunch of stuff that we care about. So it's a subscription app with a free version that essentially you play and pause audio files that guide you through prayers. We had spent a lot of time, and anyway, so the metrics on that are all over the place. There's acquisition, which is how many people can you get into the app. There's activation, which is once they're into the app, how many people do you get started. There's then engagement, which is once they're using the app, how often are they using it? What are they using? There's retention, which is, okay, how long do they hold that for? Which is a super important metric early on in like figuring out whether you have product market fit. There's sharing and virality and referrals, which is, okay, if they like it, how much organic growth are you getting from it? And then parallel to all of that, there's subscription, which is like, okay, how much are you paying for users if you're doing advertising, and how much are they subscribing, and how long are they paying for? What's the retention of subscription rates versus free rates, and all that fun jazz. There's like all this, like you read all these startup books, DAU to MAU, and all these different power smile curves. I know all the weird metrics that Silicon Valley can come up with, but there's like 100 of them. All of them are pretty important, actually, and each of them are important to watch. But for us, it was like, okay, what actually matters? And what we're actually trying to do, our mission is cheesy, but it's to let God hallow our lives, which is, you know, to help the world do the same. So to try to sit and listen for what God is asking us to do, and then go do it, and to help people do that through the app, both for us to do it primarily, and then to help other people do it. And the primary thing for that is prayer. So just listening to God through prayer. The big thing for us was like, okay, we know it's something to do with prayer. That's what we're trying to do. That's what we think it gets us excited. That's the mission we think we're being called to do. Then it's okay, well, we don't want downloads or installs or any of that stuff if it doesn't lead to prayers and people praying. So we've got to focus on that. We've got to focus on the actual usage of the app and the core of what we're trying to drive. And then it's like, okay, well, we both care about getting somebody from 0 to 1, which is like how many people are praying, and getting somebody from 1 to 2 or 2 to 3. So if somebody, like if John's praying 30 minutes a day, we also get excited for John to pray 45 minutes a day. Then we might get more excited about somebody who hasn't prayed going to 5 minutes a day, but both are important. And so trying to help people pray more who are already praying, and then also getting more people to pray. So it's both an engagement thing and an overall number thing. And then it was kind of a question of, okay, well then how often do you want to measure this? And there's like quarterly, which is insane, monthly, which is you measure a decent chunk of stuff off of monthly. But weekly for us, we wanted to try to move as fast as possible and figure out whether things were working pretty quickly. And so weekly was kind of the thing that we landed on. And so we ended up landing on weekly prayers completed as our Northstar metric or whatever, which combines like the total number of people praying with however many prayers they're doing. The nice part is there's a handful of things. The one thing is like, we still measure, like I have 5 or 6 dashboards on Mixpanel, which is the analytics tool that we use, that I can show you guys here in a second, that are like everything that you would want to see what's going on in the app. So you still have to like be super deep, and it's been super helpful for us to be super deep into the numbers to see what people are using and try to make it better, and see what improvements are driving what within the app. But the nice part is it's like, and this is kind of an extreme, but if everything went down, but weekly prayers completed was going up, we would be winning. Now we would go bankrupt pretty quickly, but we would be winning. You'd have to figure out that problem. They'd be important problems to solve if subscribers were falling rapidly or whatever that was. But our mission, we'd be doing our mission. And the other thing is, if everything else was going up, but weekly prayers completed was going down, we'd be failing. Even if we were making a ton more money, or if people were like retaining and using some little thing in the app every day, like a little chat thing in the app every day, but they weren't praying, we'd be failing. And so that's kind of a helpful, it's like a forcing mechanism to be like, okay, yeah, this month was, there's so many different things you could be like, well, this month was good because our, whatever went up and this thing went up, but this thing went down. It's like, no, this month was either good or bad because this number moved in a certain direction, and it's the weekly prayers completed number. It's also super helpful because revenue is, and subscribers are actually really good numbers. They're really useful numbers to track how effective, especially for us. Like subscription is it's driven by mostly how much value you're providing for people and how much they're retaining. And so it's a really useful metric. But to always have that or revenue come first, it's just like it clouds what you're trying to do. It just like distracts from, just makes you think about money all the time. Whereas if you're thinking about like people praying all the time, there's just something that keeps the mission itself centered, that the monetization-based metrics fail at, which are super important things. You're never not going to look at revenue because it's important to keeping a business alive, but having something that's more mission-centric as like the first thing you always report on has been nice, at least for us to stay mission-focused. That is pretty much I can show you guys. This is going to feel like a, I can share, right, John? So this is, can you guys see this stuff?
Yeah.
So this is like our Mixpanel metric thing. This is weekly prayers completed, which is a bit spiky recently with COVID, was a decent spike, and Lent is a big spike for us. But you get the sense, this is like our dashboards where we have our overall stuff, which is active users, weekly active users, trial started, and then weekly prayers completed, cumulative prayers completed, which is a fun one. Anyway, I can share more about that jazz, but that's how we kind of track it. So every day we open up, there's a little app on your phone or whatever, and it's a helpful tool to use. The last thing that I'll say is just a handful of the decisions that it's helped us with. Just to give a couple examples. The one is, I can share this one too. The one is just figuring out whether a feature is successful or not. And so let's see if we have this. If you just, so we launched a group created feature, and there's like, it's so you have a little group in the app that you can share prayers with. And it's tough to figure out, like, did it succeed? Was it the right decision? And it's, because you'll go back like, oh, well, 1,000 people signed up for it, or everybody's posting to it or whatever. And it's like, oh, it's great. But the only real thing that matters for us is like, okay, well, if people are posting to a group, is it leading to more prayers or not? Because if it's not leading to more prayers, we have to scratch it. And if it is, then we keep it and we drive it or whatever. And so this is within Mixpanel, I can do a Mixpanel tutorial later too, but they have a little impact thing that says, okay, when you launch a feature, what happened to the people who used the feature and what didn't? And so this is the average of what the people who used the feature did with the blue line. This is what it would have gone to had they been a normal user and not used the feature, which is this orange line. And this is what it was at, which is this blue line, which is interesting because it's like, okay, there's definitely a big spike here initially when people create a group, but then it drops down to the average pretty quickly. So it's like, yeah, overall, it says whatever, it's 42% impact. So it's pretty successful from the prayer completed metric, trying to drive prayers completed, but then it doesn't last very long. It comes down back to this thing, which is an interesting thing. So that's one example of like the stuff that when we look at features on whether they succeeded or failed, it's like, okay, well, there's one thing that really drives whether it succeeded or failed, and did it drive more prayers completed within the app. The other thing is, like, we give away a lot for free right now in the app. We have a subscription thing. You can upgrade to unlock the rest of the content, but I think Calm and Headspace probably give away 10 sessions, maybe 5 to 10 sessions for free users, and we probably give away 100. And the point there is, like, we want people to be able to use the app if they can't afford it forever. And driving prayers completed, it's obviously important to drive a healthy balance of subscriptions so we can sustain ourselves, but to just try to be able to use the app sustainably forever, even if they can't afford it. And that decision, we went back and forth on a bunch, but it's kind of like, okay, well, how do we the point of subscription is to drive our ability to get more people into the app to help people pray. But at the same time, we want people who would never be able to afford the app to pray, because the goal is people praying, not subscriptions or whatever it is. Now, it's actually, that's a dicier, it's a dicier debate than that, because the interesting thing is if you get people to pay even just a little bit, they're way more likely to retain and to use the app. Whereas if you download an app for free and you don't pay or don't put any skin in the game, you're likely just to never come back into the app again. So it's actually an interesting, there's an interesting debate there. But the fun part about that is, like, you get into these debates or trying to think through these things, and there's like 40 different things that you can solve for. And so you start arguing about whatever, like this helped with this, but even if you're just arguing with yourself, but this helped with this, but it drove down this and it drove up this. Whereas, like, it's still not clear whether something succeeded or failed, but at least you're talking more about a measurement thing and less about a, like, philosophical debate, which is like, look, did this drive more prayers completed or not? Which is like, let's get into the data and actually find out the answer, which is a lot more fact-based, easy conversation to have than, like, well, do we care more about subscribers or engagement of free users or whatever? The last thing I'll say is a pretty fun, or not fun, but probably the best part about it is, like, with really big decisions, it's clarifying. And so for us, like, figuring out whether we were going to just try to bootstrap the thing or try to bring on external funding partners or whatever was a big decision for us early on. And we struggled with it for a while because, frankly, like, selfishly, the reason I get really excited about doing my own thing is, like, I never want to have a boss, and I don't really want to be, like, held to different goals. And I kind of just want to sit out in the pastures and, like, watch something grow, like, you know, somebody run, like, a family business or whatever. And it's like that seems like a really peaceful experience. And then there's a bunch of other things. Like there's the risk of, well, what if you would lose control? What if you start putting money first or whatever? And a bunch of other factors that go into the decision. And so we're kind of all swirling around with like, okay, how do we make this decision? And the one thing that was decently clarifying is we were like, well, look, our goal is to get as many people praying as possible and to help them grow as close to God as possible. The question we have to ask ourselves is, fast forward 3 years, what decision, based off these two, the two decisions we could make, which one gets us to that mission, whether it's uncomfortable or comfortable for us personally, which one gets us to that goal the most effectively. And that was like a really clarifying, yeah, okay, there's a bunch of other things we need to manage and make sure that we do properly, and a bunch of second order questions that need to be, we need to make. But the first and most important decision is what is going to drive our mission and that Northstar metric as effectively as possible. Anyway, that's pretty much the whole story of us doing the picking the Northstar metric and a handful of the things that it's driven. So I don't know if there's a place that you want to go, John. That's confusing. But anyway, but happy to go wherever and answer any questions.
Yeah, great. Well, first of all, thank you for pulling back some of the curtain and sharing some of the meat and detail and how y'all look at things with the metrics. It's super insightful and valuable. We'll transition to some questions. Eric from Coin, one of the finalists is here, and Eric, do you have a question for Alex?
Yeah, I do. Hey, Alex. So we are fundamentally a marketplace that connects on the supply side people who host new groups and through those groups events, and on the demand side users. So naturally our North Star is going to be some form of bookings, like Uber has rides, WhatsApp has sends, whatever. We have RSVPs. But the problem is that our core value, one of the aspects of our core value is that we're able to deliver relationship to people who struggle to develop relationship. And relationship is an inherently difficult thing to quantify. And our problem is that RSVP to an event isn't a great correlate to relational success. It isn't sort of the metric that captures very well what our core value is. So I was curious if you had any thoughts on almost how best to quantify inherently qualitative things, or how we might be able to, I guess, kind of better measure our ability to help people create relationships, because asking people, have you made friends on Coin? Have you developed meaningful relationships through Coin? Is a very inaccurate and imprecise way to measure kind of relationships. And if you need further elaboration on what I'm asking, since I understand that this might be a little confusing, that'd be fine. But basically trying to just figure out, since we think RSVP isn't the best metric, since we deal with kind of qualitative value, what your thoughts might be on how to create a better North Star.
Yeah, I don't, it's a tough question. And the thing is, I think Northstar metrics are great because they're clarifying, but they're also not the end all be all. So and we struggled with this for a while, which is like, you can pick one metric, but that if we just focused on weekly prayers completed and didn't look at any other metrics, we would die. It's like we don't get enough data around weekly prayers completed to understand what's happening through retention or activation or any of that stuff. And it's not the only thing that matters. We do still have to, you do still have to drive, like you have to manage costs and all the stuff that is not directly related, at least at the surface level, to weekly prayers completed. I mean, it kind of reminds me of like an NPS, or like for us, we think seriously about like when you go into the prayer, what's the quality of the prayer? Like how do you, maybe somebody hates it. Like if you're doing a bunch of prayers and everybody hates it, if you get 1 million people and they all do one prayer and they all hate it, then that's a really bad. Our goal is to help you grow closer to God, not just to get you to press play. Like you actually have to build a deeper relationship with God. But the thing is, I mean, for us, and I don't know the answer to your question, but for us, there is a decent correlation between the quality of the experience and either one of two things, retention or organic viral sharing. And so for us, like the quality of the experience you can then see in the lagging indicators of retention, whether you're coming back, and sharing or virality. So how often you're sharing it and using the tools we have to share it. And so for yours, your point is, look, the quality of the relationships isn't really directly correlated to RSVPs, which is interesting. I mean, like the question would be, if somebody builds a great relationship, are they more or less likely to go to future events? And if they're less likely, then that's a really big pickle, because it's like, then it's really hard to solve that, because you have to, although you could then maybe say, hey, if you formed a great relationship, you're a lot more likely to share coin with somebody. So you could track it through some type of referral or sharing thing. But the quality, I mean, for us, the easy part is the quality of it feeds directly into weekly pairs completed. Because if you love it, then you're going to do 3 instead of 2 and 4 instead of 3. And driving that retention and engagement is based off of quality and an NPS score and all that jazz. But I don't know if that's helpful. It's like
do you guys actually do you use NPS?
We do. I mean, it's
interesting.
I have issues with anybody who fills out a survey.
Right. Do you guys just do that as like an in-app pop-up?
No, we do it as like after 30 days, we send you an email thing, which isn't the most sophisticated way to do it, but yeah.
Gotcha. Cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks. Good discussion. There's a question here from Jose. Can you please tell us about the process of can you please tell us about I think maybe Jose had 2 questions here. Okay, yeah, he did. So the one, what was your process of going all in with Hallo? And I think it's related about the process of funding Hallo too, maybe. So some people here maybe, discerning how far to go in with their company or organization, and maybe talk about that, your journey with that, and those might be related to in the funding side.
Yeah, and also we the nonprofit for-profit question, which I saw in the chat, was a tough one that we actually used the same type of decision around funding to try to decide that this is like a 30-minute conversation, so it has like 15,000 different aspects to it. But thought about it very seriously, talked to a lot of spiritual directors around it, and prayed about it for a while. What we ended up doing was structuring the company as what's called a public benefit corporation, which is a type of C Corp, but has most C Corps just have shareholder value as their primary mission. So legally, that's the only thing you're responsible for as a board and as a CEO. But a public benefit corp has the social mission equally as important as the shareholder value mission. So for us, it's helping people grow closer in their relationship with God. And what that does for us is it allows us to raise external money and raise external capital from people who are not just donors, and tap into the broader institutional capital world, while also trying to put real weight behind the fact that our mission comes first. How did we decide to go all in? It's a bit tough because it's not, for me, it was really easy. I was starting grad school in like 7 months, and I knew I was going to take like a month or 2 off before we started talking about Hallo, like 7 months before I started. So I was like, hey, I've always wanted to code something, so might as well take whatever the 6 months off instead of 2 months and try to build this thing and test it, which was like this is a much longer story. The only reason I was going to go to grad school is because I felt like I really didn't want to, but in prayer, God was asking me to. And then like 2 months later, we started talking about Hallo. But so that was pretty easy for me. It's not like I didn't have this big crisis of like I had to quit my job or whatever. I just took 6 months off and tried to work on it, which was great because it would have been very hard for me to quit without having an actual product out. And having people test it. Once we did that, we did a beta test of like 100 people, and then built a second version and had like 300 people, did like a little Kickstarter. So we kind of validated, we had a handful of hypotheses to the company, which was 1, is this a real need that this type of product helps with? 2, is anybody willing to pay for it? And 3, can you do it at scale and profitably? And 1, we answered kind of with the first beta test. It was just a handful of people, but we got a bunch of responses that were like, hey, this is exactly what I was looking for. It totally changed my life or whatever. which there's a bunch of crazy stories in that 100-person beta test that got us really jazzed up about the mission aspect of it. 2, we did this Kickstarter that was kind of like a pre-order test. So would people pay for like a month of Hallow or whatever pre-order? And then 3 is like, well, I don't know the answer to that 3 yet. So we'll figure 3 out over the next 10 years. But so that was enough to like put all of our money into trying to build the thing. And then we ended up, we talked to a number of kind of close advisors, friends, family, folks who knew the faith world well, who were kind of like half donors, half investors type people, but essentially like friends and family, although not technically family, but, we can talk about all this stuff, but we did something that's called a SAFE, which is like a way to invest in a super early stage startup. And so that was enough for us to build the first product. And then we've done, we reached out to bigger folks within the faith world and in the institutional consumer world to do more fundraising over the summer. The real all-in folks were my 2 co-founders who both had real jobs and they quit and didn't have grad school or whatever. The first one was Eric, and honestly, it was just he had wanted to work on a startup for a while, and this was like super mission oriented for him. And so he just said he was deciding he was either going to get promoted or quit. And so we sat down and we essentially just said, look, you have to pray about this. This isn't our decision, it's God's. And he prayed about it for a while and just felt like he was being called to do it. And so that's like it's a really hard decision for him to make. But it was super brave of him. So he did that. And at that point we had, enough money to build the thing and to like survive for 6 months or so. So it wasn't as low a risk. And we had proven that the product worked. And then we had the second co-founder, who was Alessandro, joined, quit full time. He hated his job and was working like 100 hours a week. So there was like a little bit of easier part there, but still a huge risk. And at that point we were launching publicly. So we kind of knew that we were all going to take and again, it wasn't like we're going to dedicate, it wasn't like either of us were like, hey, this is what we're going to do for the rest of our lives. We're risking our whole careers. It was like, hey, look, we're going to crank on this as hard as we possibly can for 2 years. And if there's one regret we could have, it's like you fast forward 5 years and you look back and it's like, man, if I would have just focused more on that, it could have worked. And none of us wanted to say that. So that was at least their motivation, but mostly honestly prayer. So God did most of the hard work in Hallow, and we just kind of screwed it up.
Great, thank you. And I guess and my understanding is there's another tier of investment too. I mean, you did raise some like a seed round also. And
that had both like your traditional consumer app investor folks and your faith folks. So our goal was like, we want to build the best, like a Silicon Valley level of tech and product experience and user experience. And so trying to bring on folks who really knew that world and obviously continued and tried to provide the best content for the faith world as possible. And so that's kind of the whole theory behind Hallow is can we straddle those two worlds and try to create something that is can get to scale and can build a great app and user experience and great technology while also bringing people into the richness and the beauty of the church.
Gotcha. So, okay. So some other questions here. To talk about Hallow's target demographic, maybe your target customer, like how you think about that?
Well, there really isn't one, unfortunately. I really wish we had one because it's, and this is like goes against my whole thing around focus before. We started the app and it was like, hey, look, we should come up with a target demographic and like a core user and focus on that. And what we came up with was essentially my own experience, which is like 20 to 35-year-olds, maybe who had fallen away from their faith or maybe who were interested in meditating but wanted their faith. And that was fine. It worked. We still have a spike in that young professional thing, like that demographic is still our biggest spike. But, and that's actually pretty even gender wise, maybe a little bit heavier on the guy side actually. But the thing that we didn't, the thing that we didn't realize we were doing, initially it was like, hey, let's build Calm for Catholics essentially, which is like, okay, let's take all these people who want to meditate in the US and like carve out this little slice of people who are Catholic. And what we realized once the app was out there was like, there's actually this whole other world. And what Calm has done actually is moved over to this other world, which is like, hey, it's actually just stress and anxiety and mental health. Let's just go after this, which is massages and working out and therapy and all this stuff. But this meditation world, there's like 2,000 meditation apps. It's super competitive and it's a relatively small group of people. Only like 14% meditate in the US. But what we started realizing was there's actually this like even larger group over here, which is people praying. Like 75% of the US prays every week, and 14% meditate every year, which is like totally different orders of magnitude. Really? But the people who were so there's this group of young professionals who are like, hey, I'm interested in meditating, but I want to incorporate my faith. It's like, okay, that's great. These techniques are like Lectio Divina and Ignatian spirituality, like really hit on that, and it's awesome. But there's this whole other group that's like, hey, look, I've been praying for 30 years, but I don't feel like I'm growing closer to God or deeper in my relationship with Christ, or like there's no real spirituality there. It just feels like I'm going through the motions. And that's like, you know, it's the same core product. It's contemplative and meditative prayer that brings you deeper in both of those things. But in that world, it's like starting with prayer. And that's a way bigger market, which is also generally older and mostly, not mostly, but heavily female. But a way bigger market for us, if you're just talking about it, and is core to our mission, which is helping people grow in their faith. Like, so it's pretty even if you break it down 18 to 35, 35 to 55, and 55 plus. We've got like 35%, 30%, 30%. No, 35, 35, 30. So it's like a pretty flat distribution with a little spike from like 25 to 35. And then as you get older, it skews heavier female. Politically we have found out that we are even on both sides. So doesn't matter what we say. Both sides are going to get mad at us. It's a pretty even split. We've got pretty fierce folks who lean left and pretty fierce folks who lean right, which is always a fun one in the current state of the world, of course, which I could talk about the emails I get, unfortunately, more often than I would like to, but fun with consumer apps. But yeah, so that's the demographic thing. Not really a great answer to it, which is great because it's like, hey, we can help a lot of folks, we've already done way more than was ever possible through anything we did. So it's just been awesome to see God work in a lot bigger way than we thought would be possible.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's not what I would have guessed at all, that that wide kind of almost even distribution across a lot of indices. It's kind of amazing, actually.
Eric has an interesting question, but sorry, you go.
Is there another question? You want to answer that one? Yeah, go for it.
It's a really interesting one. The equity mission, and I mean, it was like 80% mission. We didn't really even have an equity conversation, which is, I mean, the best part about building this type of company is like, if it was just me in charge and like, hey, I have to decide who we hire or whatever, it's like it's super stressful to make sure you have the right people and really hard to like pitch them. But the nice part is like, hey, look, it's not on me, it's on God, and you should talk to him and figure out what he wants you to do. The only thing that I'll really strongly counsel you on is if you hear what you think he wants you to do and you don't do it, that's pretty dicey. Now that could be Hallo or not Hallo, but if you think he's asking you to do Hallo or not, which we've had 5 or so folks who we've tried to hire who have said no. We have a team of, I think, like 12 total, 8 full-time, maybe 4 part-time for whoever asked that question. But yeah, the prayer thing was, and then it was like, hey, look, we just got to trust each other that like we'll figure out a fair answer on equity, something that makes sense for us and our roles and whatever we're going to end up being as a part of the company and the stage at which we joined and what we're contributing and all that jazz. So we'll figure out a fair answer to equity, but that can't be the motivating factor. I don't, at least for the 2 co-founders, it was like, you guys are going to be so and for the broader founding team, just like another 2 or 3 folks. But it was like, you guys are going to be so important to this thing that we can't be motivated by equity or monetary compensation in any way. So we can't have that conversation. You're either going to like do this thing at the same level that with putting the mission first, or we can't. The entrepreneurial thing, I'm sure, was like a decent part of it. So I'd probably say 80% mission, 15% entrepreneurial, 5% equity. And that's maybe I'm being not cynical enough, which I'm generally a pretty cynical guy, but so it's maybe like 60, 30, 10, but it was definitely mostly like, look, whatever came to you in prayer is something you got to do. And so it's a process of figuring out what that is.
And especially I mean, it sounded like you and Eric co-founded it almost simultaneously. But I guess kind of for the first hires or so, how'd you go about setting the standard of like hours worked per week? Like, are all of your full-time employees working like 50, 60, 70 hours? Because I know you were working a lot of hours per week, to get off the ground. But, as soon as you transitioned from the immediate co-founder team into sort of the first hire team, did you sort of maintain that really high level of expectation of hours per week, or was it, I guess, lowered a bit to more with usually reasonable standards for more normal workers?
We actually have we've been super blessed with the people who have joined our team. So it honestly has not been, and I can tell you 15 stories about the people who are on our team and how it was absolutely none of my doing. But so I can brag about it because I'm bragging on God's behalf. But we actually have the opposite problem, which is like Eric works maybe 90 hours a week. And so I have to call his family and his girlfriend and be like, yo, a couple nights a week, can you just watch a movie with this guy? There's nothing. I will text you if there's anything as important as him working like 80 hours a week. And our audio engineer is like cranking on a Saturday all day. And it's like, dude, no, you got to take a break, take a vacation, whatever it is. Now I mean, for us, it's mostly like and we've always been pretty clear about this. It's like, look, we're trying to do something really dope. And I don't care. Nobody on the leadership team cares about how long it takes you to do it, just that it gets done. And if we're not hitting the goals that we set, and we set OKRs or whatever every quarter and then reflect on them every week. And if we're not setting those, then we need to talk about, okay, do you need to up your game? Do we need to up our game? Is it that you're not cranking hard enough, which would be shocking if I couldn't imagine hiring somebody who I was worried about whether they would like try to work 20 hours a week or not. And if that did, that's just a total mismatch of dedication to what we're doing. And then at the other point, it's like, hey, you want to have a sustainable life. So we all set the standard of like, look, and I think it's actually, I was talking to John about this a couple of weeks ago, but it's like I think the most useful thing I learned in grad school about leadership was like, because I was watching the Michael Jordan documentary, for anybody who's seen it, The Last Dance or whatever. And I was just like, do you have to be a huge jerk to do something great? Like Steve Jobs, Michael Jordan, even Bill Gates when he was at Microsoft or whatever, but do you have to be a huge jerk to do something really awesome? And did a bunch of research on this question. And it was like, no, you do have to set like a really, really high standard for performance, which is what Jordan and Jobs and Gates did really well, which is like, hey, here's the really high standard for what we're trying to do. There's absolutely nothing short of this. Which is also what Christ does. Like it's not just don't kill somebody. Or today's gospel. It's not just adultery. It's you can't look at anybody with lust. So it's like setting an incredibly high standard, but then at the same time having like a super high level of humility, which I'm still have a long way to go with. But like knowing that your team often knows better than you what to do and how to manage their own life and what hours make the most sense and all that jazz. So anyway, that kind of trust type thing is what we've done. Now we have contractors who we say, hey, look, you're working whatever, this many hours a week. And they have to get paid hourly. And so you have to set that. And it's maybe like that's a contract that's like 30 hours a week or whatever. And so you set that and manage to it and see if you need to ramp it up to execute faster or not. So you do different things there, but for full-time folks, we don't do anything like that. We also are fully remote and have been forever. We have an office that we're going to move into for a month. So it's in a month, maybe we're able to. So it's going to be interesting to see how that changes when we're in person. There's obviously an expectation that you're there, when everybody is there.
Yeah, cool. Thanks.
Great. Wow, that was a great sweeping answer. So a lot of good practical and also inspirational things there, Alex. Thank you. There was also a question earlier about tactics that you use, that tactics or things that you found successful in helping you to meet your Northstar metric. Like, what's worked?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is content, definitely. And actually the focus on content and making the app focus on content is is definitely the most important thing we've done, because there's all these little bells and whistles you can add, but like making more content that's great and figuring out what content to put people in to. And so like we realized pretty early on that like we tried to push people through like an intro challenge to like teach you a contemplative prayer or whatever. And then we'd put you on this path where you kind of learn stuff, and then you could do daily stuff or whatever, or try out different themes and all that jazz. But what we learned was if you just put somebody, a lot of people are doing the daily rosary or the daily gospel already. And if you just give them another way to do that and just put them in that at the beginning, they can go into the challenge and like learn the basics of the technique if they want, but just throwing them into it is actually a lot higher retention way to get them to continue, because it's just like, oh, this is a habit that I can do every day. So getting them in that daily habit was a lot bigger thing. I mean, like push notifications and reminders are helpful. They drive the first like 10 days are by far the most important thing, at least for us. So you lose like 70%, like you lose an insane amount of folks, but then if you get them to do a couple of prayers in the first couple of weeks, the curve flattens out. And so figuring out ways to do those, it's crazy how like these little, so like we changed on the first screen in the app from just like a sign up with an email to either an Apple sign in or a sign up with an email, which is fascinating. So it boosted our activation rate, which is the number of people who create an account, from like 60 to 65%, which doesn't seem huge, or it's like 60 to 70%, which doesn't seem huge, but it is huge. It essentially, because like you only had 60% of people who are creating the account, so then 5 divided by 60, whoever wants to do that math, you just boosted your total number of people in the app by that more than 5%, whatever that is, which is then like the top of the funnel. The impacts you can make at the top of the funnel, especially at the beginning, are pretty huge. You need to make sure that the funnel doesn't just like slowly die, but the impacts you can make up here, because this is where everybody drops off, are huge. So anyway, we changed it to like Apple sign in and sign up with email. The interesting thing that happened there is only like 50% or so people picked the Apple sign in, but then for the people who clicked the email, a way higher percentage of people actually entered their email, which is interesting. It was like, if you just said, hey, enter your email, people were like, no, screw you. But if you were like, hey, you can either do this thing or enter your email, and they're like, okay, I'll enter my email, then it's like, I did already agree to enter my email, so like, I guess I'll have to do it now, which is like you're not going to turn me off at the choosing to enter the email, but if you just hit me with like, give me your email. Anyway, that was a fascinating thing. We tried like to try to get more people to start an actual trial to enter into the Hallo Plus version of the app or whatever. We tried like a mission-based thing, which was like, hey, help support our cause or whatever, and help support the mission and bring Hallo to 5 more people. And we tried that screen versus like, hey, if you click the trial, you'll unlock these 20 prayers or whatever. And we were like, oh, we really hope like the mission-oriented language helps, and it didn't at all. It was terrible. It was like the worst thing we did, which is like, it's pretty cynical, but it makes sense. Like you're in a decision, you're in a mindset that's like, okay, I'm trying to make a decision on money. And so when I'm making a decision on money, it's, is this worth it for me? Which is a lot more natural thing for most people to think of, which, fine, whatever, the cynical nature of human beings. So there's a bunch of tactic stuff. You also, the question on what tool we use to monitor metrics, we use a bunch of stuff. We use something called Barometrics for our like financial stuff, or Zenny actually is a great, it's like an AI CFO or whatever, but which not really. By the way, if you can find startup companies that call themselves the AI for something, sign up for it immediately, because it is the best deal you'll ever have. Because what they've done is they've went and they've raised a bunch of money to say, hey, we can build the AI for your finance division. But what that means is that they're just doing everything manual to begin with, but their price point is what it would be if it was AI. But they haven't figured out the AI yet, so you just got a bunch of CPAs and stuff doing your accounting for you, but at like the price of a computer. So anyway, so that's definitely do that. Barometrics has been a useful thing for subscription products, but the big thing is that the app analytics tool, which for us it was between the only two big app analytics tools are Mixpanel and Amplitude. There's Google, depending on what database you use, Google Firebase has an analytics tool, but it's super rudimentary. It's not nearly as intricate as the Mixpanel or Amplitude stuff. So we started with Google just because we wanted to get the app out as quickly as possible. And then we chose Mixpanel mostly because our main engineer had worked with it before. And we had conflict. They both do generally the same thing. Amplitude might be slightly better actually, but we were more familiar with Mixpanel, and they're pretty much the same functionality. So it's kind of a toss up between those two, but.
Great. Okay, great. So we're gonna wrap up a couple. Do you have we have one question, then we'll just close it out. So how did you go about finding your investors and donors? Like, what was that process? Do you have any advice about thinking about that process for people that are going through that now?
Yeah, the old adage of if you ask for advice, you get money, and if you ask for money, you get advice is definitely true. So like for us, it was mostly just having conversations with folks who we knew kind of had money, and saying like, hey, we have this great idea. We really respect you as either a business leader or somebody of faith or whatever, and would love to get your thoughts off of it or whatever. And so we just had like a 20, 30 of those conversations, which are actually really useful because people who have been successful in their careers do actually have a good chunk of really interesting and useful advice. But then at the end, they'd be like, okay, well, how are you going to, essentially you need like the first person to be like, okay, well, how are you going to fund the thing? It's like, well, okay, well, we might be taking on some investors early on. We've contributed our own money, and then we might be, we could find a way to take on one or two folks as investors early on. So it was mostly just like our own network of people we knew who we reached out to have conversations with. And then at the end of some of those, we're like, hey, is there anybody else who you'd recommend reaching out to? That's a little bit dicey, especially when you're talking to people who like regularly invest because they know that you're just trying to use them for their network. But for the folks who, anyway, you just sit down and ask for advice, and then it's obvious if you're building something and they get jazzed about it that you need some sort of funding. So if they're, anyway, we got super lucky that a handful of people asked about it, which was enough for us we did a Kickstarter, which was a little bit of it, but most of it came through like close advisors or whatever who were willing to invest, who we'd worked with before, or who trusted us. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it's great insight. So Alex, every time.
Wait, everybody gets subscriptions, right? Somebody was talking to Alessandro about that or something.
Yeah, DJ's setting it up.
Okay, cool.
We haven't announced it yet.
Oh, sorry. Whoops. Nobody gets subscriptions. You should all pay and then stay retained forever. I'll Venmo you the subscription.
We all know how to go in and mess up your metrics now too.
Yeah. When you say stay forever, you mean pray forever.
Exactly. Just heaven, that's the goal. Easy.
Yeah. Well, Alex, thank you so much for being here. This has been an amazing session, and just we're so grateful for your insight and for sharing your time and experience with us. So thank you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me. Don't trust anything I said, but reach out if you have any questions, or if there's any way that I can be helpful with anything. You guys should all have my email, I assume, John, but it's just alex@hallow.app. So that's it.
That's actually how I found Alex originally. I was just like, well, he's at a startup. It's got to be Alex@Hallow. And so I cold emailed him.
How'd you guess the .app though? How'd you guess .app?
Because that was your website.
That was our website. Yeah.
So, and I should have mentioned in the intro, Alex has been actually kind of a mentor to me. He's been giving me a lot of great advice and insight over the recent months.
John's the monk, man. You're the mentor, dude.
We help each other. So, well, blessings to you, and we'll see you soon, hopefully.
No, thank you all so much. Really appreciate being here. All right.
God
God
bless.
bless.